Hi there, and welcome to Green Shoe Conversations, episode 30. I'm Stephanie Cochran, the executive director for the Green Shoe Foundation, and I'm excited you guys are joining us today for our conversation. With me, I have got my whole team, Miss Teresa Deck, our clinical director, Stephen Brinkworth, one of our therapists, and Miss Rebecca Holt, one of our other therapists. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Good.
I'm good.
You guys are joining me. We've been kind of having a really good conversation the last couple of weeks on grief. And we've talked everything from stages of grief to Rebecca, last week you talked about task of mourning, which is great. And Teresa, I love your blog, and I know I'm plugging, all of our blogs, but Teresa, in your blog, you really talk about, compassion, and finding that. And so I wanted to kind of flip the perspective today. And, it's kind of a question, that's come to us on, we're talking about grief, but how do you help a loved one or a friend who is grieving or going through a loss? So what are kind of some suggestions, techniques or just concepts you guys have?
I think one of the
You
What?
go ahead, Teresa.
I'm sorry.
That out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think one of the greatest concepts of grief and helping someone through grief is being present. Just your presence with them, whether you say anything or not, whether you hold their hand or not, just your presence, that reciprocal relationship that they know that somebody else is there with them. I think that's very important.
Yeah, I agree. Just being able to listen and be there with them.
Even if they don't want to say anything, just being there with them, just sitting there with them, just having another presence, another individual, another connection, I think is so important, because sometimes they are in the midst of the overwhelm and they don't have anything to say, and that's okay. And you may think, well, I don't need to be here. Your presence is very important many times.
Yeah. Steve, what were you going to talk about?
With that presence, I think a huge piece is being able to listen. And with that listening, that we're not trying to explain the loss, not trying to encourage a certain time frame or where somebody should be at in their process, but to truly just listen to where they're at and be present with them, and know that in that process of grief, there's going to be some back and forth between those different stages that we've talked about. And so there may be some mood swings. There may be some pieces that look like a good day versus a bad day. And so being present, listening, and letting it be their time and their space to grieve in a way that's true to them.
So how important is it then for someone to maybe know or be aware of the stages of grief? And like what you talked about, the fact that they're not linear, that people can bounce back and forth in that.
I think it can be really helpful to know that, because a lot of times when someone's in a state of grief, they may not even realize some of the things they're doing related to the grief. There may be some anger that comes out that doesn't seem like it's related, but they're angry because they're in pain. And so being able to recognize that is huge, having that awareness, and we talk a lot about not taking that personally, but in grief, a lot of times we have to honor like where they're at, because they might even set a boundary and say, I can't do this, but not to shame or guilt, or but to understand that that's where they're at.
And you each three have kind of touched on that. It's almost like affirming their feelings and not making it be about us and what we think they should be doing.
When Rebecca said, don't take it personally, the individuals who have experienced the loss, they're in the emotional part of their brain, their prefrontal cortex and their memory part of their brain. Sometimes we go through on autopilot, and many times, especially in the beginnings and even later on. And so they don't remember the things that they've said, the things that they've done. We just are just doing robotic, and memory is not there. And so, no, it's not about us. It's about what do we need to be and holding that space for them till they're able to process that emotional loss that they're experiencing.
Yeah. I think, Teresa, you had said, it's not about us. One of the things I think oftentimes that comes up whenever we're present with someone that's grieving is we want to help them feel better. And a lot of times that's about us and our discomfort with someone being in pain. And to understand, I think when someone's grieving, that there's really nothing you can do to make it better, make them feel better. You may provide some comfort, but a lot of times, like if we're thinking, oh, what do I say? Sometimes it's best to just say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here. I'm here with you.
Teresa, you mentioned sometimes don't say anything. Talk about the gift of silence, because that can be so important.
The gifts that we give ourselves, and one of them is silence, because when we're silent, we can pay attention to what's going on inside of us. And when we pay attention, then, and I like how you said, honor that grief and honor that sadness, because if we don't grieve, we'll never heal. We'll never grow. We'll never be able to be okay if we don't get in touch with that sadness and that pain. We have to be silent. We have to shut things off sometimes so that we can hear what's going on inside of us. So important to be silent, and meditation and prayer and being silent, so you can hear yourself. And that's funny, but you have to be silent in order to hear what's going on inside of you.
Mm-hmm. And I know for me, sometimes that's hard. I want to feel the silence. But I also know on the other end of that, sometimes those moments of silence, especially when you're with somebody, can actually be so powerful and so healing.
You can feel a connection with another person sitting right next to them and nothing is being said. Mm-hmm. You don't have to, just that presence. And even that silence is a message, to yourself that I'm here for you. You don't have to say anything. I don't have to say anything. I'm here for you.
Which, and Rebecca, you touched on this, almost takes the pressure off. We don't have to know the perfect thing to say, or don't go in with a plan, just go to be, with them.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things working with people who have experienced grief, we talk a lot about things people say that maybe aren't helpful. Mm-hmm. And I know we're probably going to talk about that, but one of the things that often comes up is whenever someone says, "You're so strong." Sometimes providing a place to say it's okay to be weak is one of the most helpful things. This is a place that you can feel what you need to feel. And so, as you talk about that, I think that that's really important to remember, is giving them a place to feel weak.
Mm-hmm. And I think we get into saying sometimes those things because, again, we're trying to make them feel better. We don't know what to say. I know some things that either have been said to me or, I've heard, it's part of God's plan. And, I know I wanted to come back with the response of, well, he didn't tell me that plan. What other things? I mean, we were kind of talking about this earlier, Teresa and Steve, that maybe not be the best things for people to say.
One of the things that I've heard from many people is the impact of hearing that I should already be over it. Mm-hmm. That there's a timeline for me to grieve from somebody else's expectation. And I know that's been a deeply wounding thing to hear, because I also get the message that it's not safe for me to talk about this grief with that person. And so that's another piece of keeping it in.
Yeah, even just with a couple of podcasts a couple of weeks ago about how holidays, you may be triggered, with a memory and feel that loss again. And so for someone to tell you it's not okay, or it's been too long, you shouldn't be sad about that. Yeah.
I think one of the other things that's is not helpful is at least statements. Mm-hmm. At least this didn't happen. At least they went quickly. At least this And so those at least are not helpful at all, because it negates the fact that I'm grieving right now and that I'm sad and I'm depressed. And so those are not helpful, those statements.
I also kind of think about the statements of when we've expressed a loss, no matter what it is, and that we hear from another person, I know exactly what you're going through. It negates some of that individual experience of that grief, because we each experience that in our own way. So even if I understand what it's like to lose someone, that's still an individual piece. So I don't know exactly what they're going through.
That's right. Your grief is not mine, and we can't feel for somebody else. And so, no, we don't know exactly what they're feeling. So,
Sometimes that even happens when you're experiencing some of that grief as well. It may be somebody you cared about too that was lost, or the loss of what that was. But even those, we're going to experience different stages, different everything, over the same situation.
Yeah. I think another thing is asking the person what they need. So, for example, do you want to talk about it? Do you, just because if you don't, that's okay. But I'm here to listen if you want to talk about it. Just asking them what they're comfortable with. The other thing, and as you guys were talking about that, invalidating their emotions, but they're in a better place. That doesn't help to hear that, because they're not here with me.
Right. I would think staying away from you should or you will statements. Yeah, would be good.
Yeah.
Or always or never, or
I think a lot of times too in grief, we want to help people, and sometimes we can bombard them with questions. Would you like for me to do this? Or what would you like to eat? Or, even especially after a loss, because of where they're at emotionally, sometimes making decisions for people can be helpful. I will drop off groceries at this time. Because we always use that statement of like, I'm here if you need me. But chances are that person isn't going to say, okay, I need you and here's what I need. We can make an assumption about. Yeah, they might not even know what they need.
And we talked about this in a previous conversation, the casseroles, but taking food. So that way, that's something they don't have to decide on. There is food there. Doing the dishes,
Stephanie, as you mentioned those casseroles, one of the things I think about is how important it is to check in on that person a month after that loss, because there's that initial period where there may be a bunch of attention and connection and people doing, but then that begins to fade. And so making sure that that they're not alone. And if they are alone, that they're right where they need to be, allowing them that space, but also making sure that if there's something that can be done, that you're able to help out where you're able to.
Yeah. And remembering that the holidays, this is the first Christmas without my uncle. And so of course I'm thinking about my aunt, and again, it's 7-8 months, past, but you need to remember that people are struggling through the first holidays. Or sometimes it's even the second or third holidays, to kind of be there and check in with them.
I think one of those things, Steve, is you talk about, a month down the road, but even a year, 2 years down the road, sometimes one thing that can be helpful is sharing stories of that person. Because I think someone that's grieving, that's gone through some of those initial stages, one of the things that's really important to them is keeping that person's memory alive. And so that might be a picture, that might be when you see them, hey, can I share a story that I want to tell you? Again, asking them permission to do that. But sometimes that can be really healing to know that their loved one is thought of.
It's very helpful to allow people, when they're ready, to talk about them. And if you can feel the tension in a room and nobody's saying it, but somebody needs to offer the opportunity. Would you like to talk about them? Or would you like to talk about this? Or, but letting them share their story helps them grieve and helps them heal. And so it's very important for them, even if it's not in the week or two or month or two, but a year or two. And you see and you still notice that there's some pain and sadness there. And so ask them if they want to share what it's like without them now.
Yeah, I love that, not being afraid to ask questions. I know a lot of times I find myself being a therapist, wanting to get in that therapy role. Here's some things that might be helpful, but I've learned, I mean, in very personal relationships, I have to step back and say, is there anything I can do to help? Instead of assuming I know what you need, or I know what you need to hear. I know that's probably been like a big theme of our conversation today, but again, just asking questions. If you don't know what to do or what to say, I mean, say that or ask.
If your gut says and is wondering, it's okay to ask, because they can say, no, I don't want to talk about it, or I don't need this, or wow, this would be nice. So
yeah, I do think you're right, Rebecca.
That permission seeking is huge, to check in with where they're at. And that's different than is there something that you need right now?
Yeah.
But to be able to check in and check in with that permission of, would it be okay to talk about this?
Yeah.
Sharing some of our own stories, I think it's also important to not step into, try to help tell them how to grieve. This is what I did, and you really ought to try this. That last part can feel very intrusive.
Absolutely. I do think the theme is what we've talked about, it is just be there, listen. And if you don't know, just ask.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks for having this conversation. Again, this has kind of been a very powerful 3 weeks. A lot of people are experiencing loss as they're going through the holidays. Again, in this pandemic, the holidays, Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, all that's going to look different, as we go through, but finding ways that we still can connect and be with each other is going to be so important. Next week is going to be our Christmas and holiday podcast. I encourage everyone to join us with that. It's going to be a lot of fun, and maybe entertaining is a good way to say that. I know that makes me nervous when I say it, but we're so glad everyone joined us. If you would like to get a hold of us, you can reach us on our website at greenshoe.org. Also email at info@greenshoe.org. If there's any topics, we are heading into 2021 and we're excited for the new year and what it's going to bring. If anything you'd like to hear us talk about, let us know, and we will have everybody next week.